Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel on living donation and faith communities. My name is Jed Gross, and I'm a member of UHN's bioethics program, where my work supports our transplant team. Before our panelists introduce themselves, I'll just remind you that you can submit questions on slido.com using the event code AM4. Today's session is being recorded and will be available on the Center for Living Donation's YouTube channel. Let's meet our panelists. First, Dr. Asim Padella is a clinician scientist working at the intersection of healthcare, religion, and ethics. Dr.
Morning.
Padella, would you have anything you'd like to add?
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. In addition to that, I work on the aspects of organ donation with the Muslim community, both in the terms of empirical work on how Muslims think about this, but also how Islamic jurists opine around the topic.
Thanks. And next we have Pandit Rupnath Sharma, who is a practicing Hindu priest and a leader in several community organizations.
It's good to be on board. It'll be a learning lesson for me to hear what's happening, because the idea of organ donation is kind of new to our community. There are many, many thoughts about should we, shouldn't we, and hopefully we will address them along the way.
Sure. And Esther Dick is a living kidney donor who now works at Renewal, an organization that promotes organ donation in the Jewish community.
I'm happy to be here, and I look forward to hearing everybody speak.
Next, we have Esther's colleague, John Anhang, who is the founder and director of Renewal's Toronto branch.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm thrilled about this event. I look forward to telling our story and also learning about other people's story. And many thanks to UHN, and particularly to Paula Neves for organizing this. Thank you.
Thanks. And we have Claudia Morgan, who is a kidney transplant recipient who can speak to the support of her Christian church.
Thank you for having me. I'm also working as a volunteer for the Transplant Ambassador Program, so I look forward to sharing a little bit about that as well.
Thanks. We look forward to hearing from you. And Pastor Bruce Jones is the senior pastor at Willowdale Baptist Church.
It was a great joy for our church to walk through the whole process with Claudia, and we learned a lot about simply loving each other through the whole thing. So it's great to be here.
Yeah, I should have noted that's Claudia's congregation. And finally, we have Pastor Joel Gordon, who is also creative director at the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada.
Great to be part of this conversation. Looking forward to listening and learning a great deal from everyone.
Sure. I think that's everyone. I'll spare you any hackneyed jokes about a priest, a minister, and a rabbi, and we'll move right into Dr. Padella's presentation.
Well, once again, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to the UHN Network and to everybody who's put this together. I have the unenviable position to start off. So my conversation this morning is going to be trying to bring some theory to the community education around organ donation. So with that, I just want to say I'm presently at the Medical College of Wisconsin, but I also direct a nonprofit called the Initiative on Islamic Medicine. And so you'll see both of those aspects of my academic hat as well as community hat come into this presentation. So to begin, let's see if I, hold on, I have control, yes. So to begin, there we go. Part one of my short talk will be about attitudes and beliefs. What I want to set up is the idea that there are many different determinants to organ donation behaviors in the community, religion being one aspect of them. And the second part of my talk, I'm going to take a deep dive into that aspect, particularly within the Muslim community, speak a little bit about how Muslims think about organ donation, what the Islamic tradition says about that, and then talk about an intervention in the community space around these attitudes. And lastly, I'm going to share with you some research, some data from our own tailored and balanced educational RCT, which is a randomized controlled trial, and share with you how we went about creating pamphlets and actually informing a fatwa, which is a religious ruling around organ donation in the American context. So with that, just a little bio about myself and a little bit more detail. So there's three things I do. There's an intersection of research work at the intersection of the Islamic tradition, biomedicine, and Muslim practices. So I conduct work on three populations: the Muslim patient population, the Muslim physician population, and indeed Islamic jurists, the scholars who are in charge with delivering, talking about what the faith has to say. So my work spans empirical, textual, and theological research. Our goal is to think about how Muslim behavior, right, is informed by these religious notions, and then to create Islamic bioethics interventions, meaning interventions that bring the faith and the medical context together in the setting of the community as well as in the mosque. So in the context of organ donation decision making, I think there's three boxes we should think about and what makes it very challenging. First is that the medical context is quite challenging and complex. Organs are of different types. There are different questions about what's deceased donation, what's living donation, and there are processes where this becomes a little bit muddied. But there's also the context of families and communities. We all know that not every Muslim shares the same views on everything, nor does anybody else. We're all individuals, and we all have unique family structures and unique community influences. So the way that we think about organ donation will change depending on our particular context. And lastly, there's a lot of ethics around this, right? So there are the questions about, should I do something? Should I not do something? Can I do something, right? And if I do it, am I sinning? Am I not sinning? So that all comes together in a very complex way for each individual. So these decisions are made at the individual level, sometimes at the community and family level, but they're all unique. I don't think there's any situation is the same from one context to another. So a way to organize these sorts of processes is through theory. And there's a theory that we use in the healthcare environment, particularly around health education, called the theory of planned behavior. Now, it assumes that people plan their behaviors, and that's an assumption. But at the end, there's a process of how you think about an intention to make an action. So the biggest focus of this theory is on intention. What we know from scores of data is that 50% of individuals who make an intention to do something will end up doing it. Right? So in this context, we want to think about the donation of an organ. Then 50% of individuals who make an intention to donate an organ will end up doing it. So the focus is on informing intention. And there are three domains, or three sort of large boxes that inform one's intention to do an action. The first is an attitude. And so what that means is, how do I feel about something, about doing an action? And what outcomes do I expect from doing it? So in the context of, how do I feel generally about organ donation, and what outcomes for myself and for the society do I expect from participating in this act? The second domain is what we call subjective norm. And that has to do with, what do important others around me think about my doing that action? So the context of organ donation, what are those people who are important to me? My mother, my father, my sibling, my pastor, whoever those people are, those important people in my life, what do they think about my doing this action, donating an organ? That impacts one's intention. And the third domain is called perceived behavior control. If this pops up, let's see. There we go. Oh, well, the third domain is perceived behavior control, which has to do with the fact that, can I accomplish the act itself? Do I myself have the agency to accomplish that act? So these are the three domains. And most educational interventions have to do with the subjective norm. What we focus on, and even in a certain way, this panel, is to bring important people together from different communities to talk about the topic, to inform how you think important others in your life, perhaps religious leaders in this context, think about the act of donation. And then that will impact an individual's intention for that action. So within that sphere, there's two things, again, if you move sort of backward into the model, that inform this notion of subjective norm. And this is where, in our work, we have brought in the religious context. So one is normative beliefs. And if you put that in a religious lens, how does God or the religious community in general view my doing of this action of organ donation? Do they approve? Do they disapprove? Is there someone in between, right? Can the community, or does, in this case, the deity, both say that it's okay to donate? Is it okay not to donate? How is that being informed? So that's the normative belief structure of a religious community, which impacts an individual's intention. And then there's motivation to comply. Do I really care about what religious scholars say or think, or what, in this case, the deity or the religious authority says or does not say? So you could say, yes, religion says, let's take an example, and this is how it works in the religious community often. A religious scholar says you should do something, but that doesn't mean that everybody from that community will do that thing, right? Whether it be, in our case, praying or fasting or doing pilgrimage, whatever it might be. Because that action or that leader is not as important to the individual's makeup of how I make decisions. And we have to bear that context in mind, because religion is just one aspect of one's identity. And it might not be the most important aspect when one makes an intention. So I break this out because when we're going to talk about religious context and faith communities, we should recognize that there's a lot that goes into one making an intention to donate an organ, and that religion is but one component. However, I'm going to move to the Muslim context in a second. When we think about involving or evoking religious scripture or involving religious leaders, we have to think about how that plays a role in people's norms. So I'm going to share this last piece here, and this is going to set up the third part of my talk about what we've done in the Muslim community, where we think about normative beliefs as a sort of a can I question. Is it religiously permissible for me to do something? And the person or the group of scholars who can say that are religious jurists, right? They can inform a fatwa or a religious ruling, for example, of can I? They're just simply asking, can you do this or not? Is it permissible or not by the faith community? The second aspect is, should I? And oftentimes that is not answered by the jurist or the fatwa or the religious scholar. That's based on a community notion, right? Should I? Should I think about it? So yes, I know I can, but should I? And that is often, if you don't think about those two aspects, and you say that a fatwa is going to change behaviors, or a religious leader saying something on the pulpit is going to change something, you're forgetting that that's just the can I question, not the should I. So now, as I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Muslim quote unquote problem or the context with organ donation. And in this case, I want to bring data forth from both the living context, living donation, and deceased donation. So as I mentioned, I've done a lot of empirical work in this domain. Here are a few studies of mine and another colleague of mine talking about organ donation in the diaspora. So you see here, the first study was in Michigan, where 35%, it's about 1,000 people and Arab Americans, both Muslim and Christian, Chaldean, and 35% held that deceased donation was always justified. It should say held that deceased donation, yeah, so only a minority did, and then Muslims were less likely to support that. When I went into the Muslim community itself, this sample is now from mosques in that area in Michigan, we found again the same notion that the minority, 39% supported donation after death, and more than half believed that it was not ethically justified. So the overwhelming view was that we should not be donating organs. A larger study of Western Muslims, this was largely UK, Canada, and the United States, you see again the same signal, that the majority, or in this case, the minority, felt organ donation was compatible with their faith, right? And those who had higher religiosity were less likely to hold positive views. So this sets up this notion of a Muslim problem, right, of organ donation. I can share other data if you would like, but generally across the geography, both in the American context and the UK context and the Canadian context, and actually in Muslim majority nations, there's low support for organ donation in the Muslim community. People assume then that means that Islam is a factor, right? So we should inform and reinforce the idea that Islam, the religion itself, encourages donation, or that it's permissible to donate, and that will increase the donation in the community. That's the logical train that's used in a lot of community programs. You'll see the form that this takes is often a fatwa. So this is one from the UK in 1995, that they released a fatwa that was indigenous from that community, from scholars from that context, who said organ donation is permissible and laudable, and they wanted organ donation behaviors to change. Or in a community education, where you bring people together, you bring some scholars together, you say, hey, look, organ donation is permissible by the faith, now I want your attitudes to change. By and large, when you study these sorts of interventions, nothing changes on the ground. The rates don't improve. And part of that reason is what I set up before, that you're not engaging the entire notion that faith is but one component, and that you're only talking about the can I question, not the should I. So let me share a few other things in this domain. That religious permissibility is not the only Muslim concern, right? So I've done some work here, and colleagues of mine, those are a book and then a paper of ours. So when you think about religion, there are other concerns people have. So in our context, the focus groups, we found that people worried about the treatment of the body, both in living and deceased donation. Are the modesty requirements that Muslims have met during that process? people worried about whether they would be morally culpable for the deeds of the recipient, right? So if I were to donate my organ and that person does something that's sinful with that organ, am I now liable because I facilitated that action by the act of donation? There's a large concern, and in the Q&A we can talk about this, around brain death, and I put it in quotes because both as a physician, as a bioethicist, and as a religious sort of literate, not scholar I'd say, but someone who's literate in the tradition, this is a very controversial area, right? And Muslim scholars are on different spectrums of what brain death means. Some say it's a true death, it's ontological death, others say no, it's a dying state. Therefore, even the definition of what's living and deceased will change based on which scholarly view you follow. And then those are part and parcel of the religious concerns, but they're not just about can I. Moving forward, the next sort of domain to think about is this idea of other solutions. So oftentimes when you go into the religious community, they say, well, why are we trying to promote donation from individuals, humans, when we can prevent the fact that people have kidney failure in the first place, right? Why don't we focus on giving hypertensive treatment or diabetic treatment as a prevention modality? Why is money being spent in one area and not the other? Can we think about xenotransplantation from monkeys or pigs, or synthetic organs, which are now a active area of research? So why don't we focus on other solutions as opposed to just trying to change people's behaviors? The other aspect of now from Muslim to Islam is that plurality is inherent in the tradition about organ donation. So we can talk more about this in the Q&A. I believe the Imam will be joining us, but if not, I'm happy to deal with this since this is an area of my own expertise. But there are three general ideas around organ donation. Again, we can parse out what's living and what's deceased, but generally speaking, organ donation is impermissible is a valid view in the tradition. And they base this on the notion of violating human dignity. And those two Arabic terms, hurma and karama, have specific meanings. And as I said, I'll go into that should our other scholar not be able to be here. The other domain is organ donation is impermissible in principle. I mean, that's the real ruling, but it's conditionally permitted because of dire necessity. People are dying because they're on the waiting lists, and therefore we allow this, what is generally impermissible modality of donating, to be conditionally permitted, as long as that situation exists and there's no alternative. And that's the real point here. So if synthetic organs exist, then perhaps this would not become permissible. It would default back to the impermissible ruling. And the third notion is that organ donation is permissible, right? And generally speaking, but has several stipulations. And the basis of that is that it serves a general public interest. People, and health in this case, right? People's health, life-saving or life-enhancing treatment is what organ donation allows. Therefore, because it's a general public interest, you can go forth. Now, this in the Canadian context is fine because people have access, but in the United States, not everybody has access to organ donation. Again, that questions the permissibility of that on a religious scale. So the medical context here is also a little bit interesting, right? Because there's risks and benefits to organ donation. The benefits are not all the same for all organs. As I just sort of foreshadowed, there's some life quality enhancing donation or organs like the cornea, and there are life-giving ones like the heart. So it's not a singular context. And the risks are not equal for all individuals. People who donate their kidneys, living donors, all of them have increased the risk of kidney failure. That might be marginal for some people, minimal for others, and significant for others. So the point is that this is a fact, a medical fact, and we should all be cognizant of that, depending on your own sort of comorbidity makeup. And then there's family stigma in some families, right? So people in certain contexts are stigmatized for donating, and we should recognize that. Lastly, I'll say now, and generally speaking, societal level, there are other concerns about whether or not we somehow devalue the human being by thinking ourselves as interchangeable parts, right? As opposed to this honored one creation of God, that rather now we are just interchangeable parts, and people now are going to think of ourselves as that way. And that they also set up a quote unquote black market, which we know exists in certain parts of the world, where people, because of circumstance, usually the poor individuals, have to sell their organs to suffice getting food and providing for their families. So we should recognize that as well. And because of this context, some scholars might be more conservative, quote unquote, to say we shouldn't permit organ donation because of these implications societally. So now moving forward to the project that we did over the last 3 years, what I'd call a better intervention in the Muslim community. It had these aspects where we dealt with both the can I and the should I. The can I being this fatwa notion, right? So we presented in the context of intervention in mosques, fatwas for and against organ donation, living and deceased. So we presented people with, this is the plurality from the tradition. Let's give you enough data so you can make informed choices, right? So the religious reasons for and against, at the same time, the biomedical benefits and risks, as I just enumerated, right? What's the benefit and risk? How can you calculate that? There actually are calculators online. And we gave data, we gave information around the procedural aspects of organ donation, both how one would go about it in the living space and then the deceased space. We then had, that's the can I. So now you have information about the can I. Then these experts who talked about all this left the room. And we had peer-led discussions. So we trained peer educators to have people talk about the pros and cons, right? And what resources they have to have discussions in their families after. So this was the should I notion, right? So we don't want an expert telling you what to do. Rather, now you can cogitate and actualize the knowledge yourselves by peers. So there's no experts here, just have conversations to think about what you want to do at the end, right? To better inform your choices. So our hope was to increase agency, knowledge, and then agency to donate through informed choices. And I'll just mention that project was funded by the Health Resources and Services Administration, and we had partners from the Kidney Foundation, Gift of Hope, both in the Illinois context. So what it looked like was that we had 2 workshops, and I'm now near the end. So for those timekeepers, I'm going to get finished on time, don't worry. We had 2 workshops, one on end-of-life care, one on organ donation. Given what I mentioned, that deceased donation, right, is a different view based on whether you think brain death is a living state or a dead state. So we talked about both contexts and workshops. This was in 2 cities, Chicago and Washington, D.C. And our objectives were to see whether or not education improved behavior and knowledge. And we want to develop Muslim community-facing brochures that were data-driven. So the workshops occurred this way. There's a pre-sermon, a sermon given to the larger community talking about religious bioethics and caring for one another, not about organ donations per se, but that set up the idea that this community will now be part of an intervention. We're going to talk about this controversial area. We had didactic lectures about the biomedical, procedural, and religious aspects, as I just mentioned. And then we had the closing was a peer-led sort of educational discussion where you would go through pros and cons. And this was in each circle. So people broke out into little groups. And each group would report back to the group, to the larger group, what the pros and cons were for donating an organ from their view and their shared knowledge with each other. These sheets were very important to create the brochure, which I'll talk about in one more slide. So what were the results of the study? This is a busy slide, but generally I can share I wanted to share this for the source here, but this is what generally occurred. Right, we found that there was increased biomedical knowledge of organ donation, religious knowledge as well, both the pros and cons, risks and benefits. People increased in their preparedness. So we asked them not whether you want to donate, but are you prepared to make a decision? And generally speaking, the group increased in preparedness. We asked them about their likelihood to donate a kidney, since we were focused on living donation. And that also increased for all comers. And then we asked them about their likelihood to encourage others to think about. So if you have a relative or a mosque member who needs a kidney, because would you encourage them to seek out a donor? And they said that as well. So across spectrum, across 4 mosques in 2 cities, across hundreds of people, we found that all these markers increased, which gave us some validity to the model that we employed. At the same time, as I mentioned, one of the outputs was this brochure development from data, right? From these pro and con sheets, and looking at what already existed in the space around brochures of organ donation, we wanted to create our own that was based on sort of expert written content that's data driven. And how this, and I can share this with people in the end, and there's a link as well, that we would have a scenario. We could have the scenario of Sharif, right, who wanted to decide about living donation. So he would speak about the medical considerations. He would speak to this doctor and answer questions. And these questions that the doctor answered were based on the sheets that we had from the groups. Similarly, the religious leaders, he would talk about the religious context. And the same aspect here would come from the questions that people asked in the workshops. Then the other aspect of this was not just living donation, but deceased donation. So this was another character we came up with who talked about this aspect. What can be donated, what can't after death, and these sorts of questions. And we wanted to dispel myths. Again, all based on what the conversation happened in those workshops. And then in the end, we had a decision tree, right, where people could follow themselves, see themselves Am I healthy enough? Yes. Or do I have this concern? No. So you would have a tree about whether it would be religiously permissible for you to or not have to donate your organs. And then the pamphlet in the end was approved by the Association for Medical Cultural Affairs and Transplantation in the United States, and then the FIC Council, the Religious Council of North America. And ultimately, as I mentioned, I was part of the group that helped write this fatwa that came out in 2019 or 2018 on organ donation from that FIC Council. So in the end, we also then wanted to popularize this. So we had public media consumption, these sort of articles that came out around organ donation in Muslim media articles. So not just in the academic sphere, but in Muslim magazines. And as I said, I'll end here. So we have some time for questions for me, or I can take some questions after others speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Padella, for that nuanced approach to the variety of concerns and motivations within a religious community. I think we've been joined by Sheikh Yusuf Badat, who is an Imam and Director of Religious Affairs at the Islamic Foundation of Toronto. Imam Badat, why don't you introduce yourself, and the floor is yours.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Yusuf Badat. It's an honor and a blessing for me to be part of this organization and this event. I begin, as always, by praising the Almighty, and I send the best of salutations upon all the prophets and messengers of God, including Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. This is a very important and a great topic, and I've done considerable work in this field here with Service Ontario as well as Trillium. I've been part of the Be a Donor campaign. I've written some papers and some academic articles on the topic, and I've done a number of presentations on this particular topic. And I've worked with some of the hospitals here in Toronto within this field as well. So it's great to be part of this event and conduct this presentation. Obviously, some of the things that I am going to say or was about to say has been covered very aptly and succinctly by Dr. Asim. I appreciate his input, and it looks like we're on one page. I guess I'll get right into the presentation. I also look forward to hearing from the other speakers and interacting with them. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions or queries that might be on your mind that are directed towards me. And by doing so, we can create more awareness and ultimately save lives. To proceed, let's see how I'm going to move to the next slide. So, okay, there we go. So we've done the introduction. So from the Islamic perspective, life is a very great blessing. If we have life, we're able to enjoy life. If we don't have life, we basically can't even worship. We can't enjoy life, and it's the end of our existence here on this earth. I refer to a verse of the Holy Quran. God Almighty says that whoever saves a life, it's as if they have saved all of humanity. And whoever takes a life unjustly, then for sure it's as if they have unjustly violated the lives of all humanity. So these type of verses, these type of source texts, they highlight the fact that life is very sacred, it's very important, and I'm sure all religions, they share this sentiment. So that being said, we have to always preserve, protect, and maintain life. Now, if we look at the Islamic theology and what we call the fiqh or the jurisprudence, one of the maqsads of the Sharia, or one of the objectives of the Islamic law, is that we should never ever engage in doing anything that would violate the preservation of life, that would violate the sanctity of life, and that includes maintaining our health. So we find, for example, the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, who is considered a role model, a mentor, a guide for Muslims. When we look at his health, we see that it was at its optimum. In some of the report, it's mentions that he only ate a decent meal once in a day. He refrained from eating too much red meat. He never filled his stomach till the till the maximum. He took water consistently, and it's also mentioned that he would work out. And some of the companions, when they describe his personality and his physique, they say that even though he had reached the age of 50 or almost 60 prior to his demise, his stomach and his chest were in line, also denoting his health and being active. In fact, his wife, Aisha, may God be pleased with her, she would race with the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him, and she was quite young. And initially, she would always beat the Prophet in the race. But towards the latter part of his life, it was the Prophet Muhammad who would beat her in the race. And again, she would attribute that to her, health, etc. But the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him, was optimum in his health. So I'm highlighting this example from the source text to show that how important it is to preserve and protect life. And this is what Islam teaches, that anything that would, violate the protection of life, it would be considered either makruh, which is disliked, or it would be considered haram, which basically means forbidden. And that's why, I refer to another source text where the Prophet of Islam said, kullu muskirin haram, anything that intoxicates, anything that violates the uprightness of the mind and the body, it should be avoided, it should be refrained. So again, what I'm highlighting here, it's that Islam promotes that we protect and preserve and we maintain life at all times. Moving on here. Okay, so organ donation has been debated and discussed by Muslim jurists over the years. So as we've heard Dr. Asim given reference to some of these discussions and these debates. Now, I've studied from traditional seminaries, and I've actually studied manuals and jurisprudence, books of the classical scholars, and then also looked at many contemporary experts in the field of Islamic law and jurisprudence. And what we find is that this is not a new topic for Muslim experts in Islamic law. From the oldest manuscripts that I've studied, there has been talk about, I'll give some examples. There has been talk about if a medical expert is treating a patient and they find that there is some medicine that can be produced to preserve and protect the life of this patient through an organ or a fluid that comes from a human body, is it permissible to consume that as a medication and preserve that life and help that patient? So when we look at all these discussions, even in the classical source text, we find that there's a whole debate and a discussion around this. And again, the point of maintaining life gives us that flexibility that yes, in these situations, with some stipulations and conditions, it is permissible and we can safeguard the life and maintain the life. And that way it would be allowed from the Islamic point and the Islamic law. And then we have contemporary discussions that Dr. Asim also gave reference to, which I've read and I've also seen many current organizations, institutions, well-renowned scholars who have all leaned towards permissibility with some stipulations and some conditions. Moving on here. So I'm going to give reference to the Islamic Fiqh Assembly of the Muslim World League, which is based in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. So basically, a little introduction about this organization is that it's an assembly of Islamic scholars from across the world, internationally renowned Islamic scholars and Islamic experts. They meet once a year in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, And most of the discussions that take place in these assemblies are about new topics and current issues that either have not been talked about previously, or there have been some nuances or some new details that need to be debated and discussed. So over the last, I would say, 20 years or even more, we find that this topic of organ donation, organ transplantation, etc., have been debated and discussed. The papers are readily available in various languages, and all the academic discussion, as well as the perspectives from different ulama or Islamic experts and scholars, have been recorded. And again, what we see here is that a leaning towards the permissibility, the preservation of life, and again, some stipulations that allow us to facilitate both the transplant, the harvest, as well as the transplant of the organs to save and protect and preserve life. So as we move on here. Okay, so as I said, the leaning is towards preservation of life. And this discussion is also surrounding the fact that we can be live donors, as well as we can harvest an organ from a deceased. Again, the idea is that there are some stipulations and there are some conditions. Now, I've been mentioning stipulations and conditions, so I'm going to highlight that so you get an idea. And some of the discussions surrounding these conditions or these stipulations have been mentioned briefly by the previous speaker. So let's get into this here. So the first condition or the first stipulation is the process of the organ donation or the transplant, as well as the harvest of the organ, must uphold the dignity and the honor of the human being. You see, there's a verse of the Holy Quran, and I'm going to quote the verse, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, where God Almighty says in the Holy Quran that God has given extended honor to the human being, has given dignity, extraordinary dignity to the human being. So this discussion has been debated among scholars that if we make incisions in a human being, whether live or deceased, and harvest an organ, this may be on the borderline of not showing that dignity. But again, what the scholars have come up to as a conclusion is that we look at the objective. There's a means and there's an objective. That incision is not to, disfigure the human being, or it's not to cause harm or dishonor the human being. It's rather for a higher objective. And again, that objective is the sanctity of life and protecting life. So therefore, the process that is presently done, we have great technology, we have precision, we have aptitude, we have great experts of the field who have rendered countless transplants, etc. So with all of this put in mind, we see that there's only respect and honor that is being accorded and afforded to the human being while doing the process of the transplant, as well as the harvest or the taking of the organ from a human body. Another stipulation here or condition is that the objective must be to save lives. So we're taking out the organ and we're transplanting the organ to improve life or to save a life. It's either one of the two. So this is one of the maqsads of the Sharia. This is one of the core objectives of Islam, that we want to preserve and protect life. So therefore, this process of organ transplant and donation, it is in tune, it is in line with the objectives of Islamic law and the Sharia. Moving on here, another stipulation is that a professional medical expert has to have declared that this patient will benefit with this organ. Or a medical expert has to determine, yes, you are of the right blood type, you can donate your organ, you're not going to be adversely affected. So there has to be a medical expert who has assessed the situation here and given that go ahead or that green light, that yes, in this situation there's preservation of life, there's dignity, there's honor, and the process meets the criteria, because we can't just get anyone as they say, Tom, Dick, or Harry, just taking out an organ and trying to help someone. It has to meet the whole process through the experts of the field. The donor must give the consent willingly, voluntarily. They have to give the consent, and this goes for both those that are live donors or a deceased donor. While they were alive, they should have given consent. Here in Ontario, when we update our licenses or our health cards, etc., then the question is asked, the consent is done every time we do that update, and there's a signature. So there's a whole process that meets this criteria from the Islamic point of view. So if a donor hasn't given the consent, then we cannot harvest organs. Earlier, we heard about some parts of the world where the poor are put into situations where their organs are harvested, and they're not even told that what's going on, and there's a lot of violations in some parts of the world in this aspect, and we hear about it, we see it in the news. But so that's why one of the stipulations, one of the conditions is definitely that there has to be consent. The donor has to willingly give that permission to donate their organ for the preservation of life. Live donors should not be adversely affected in health or normal life. So someone may need a liver, and I may fit the criteria, but then when I'm assessed, there's a chance that there's tremendous risk for me that might lead to my death. So then in this situation, it would not be permissible for me to donate my liver, because by donating, I might be saving a life, but I'm taking away my own life. So suicide is forbidden in Islam. But if a medical expert has assessed the situation and everything is fine, and temporarily or momentarily I might face some challenges, but my normal life will be assumed to be as normal as possible within a few weeks or within a month or so. So in this situation, it would be absolutely allowed and permitted for me as a live donor to donate an organ, again, to preserve life. And then we have the whole discussion about an organ. It should not be sold. This is not about business and trade. This is about the sanctity of life, and this is about the preservation of life. And as Islam indicates, that every organ of our body, every fluid of our body, it's actually a trust. It's an amana. It's a trust from God. So we can only use it the way God has permitted for us. So there's no reference whatsoever that we could ever sell an organ of ours, or we could purchase an organ. Rather, this process has to be through voluntarily, without any business or trade involved. So these are the core stipulations. Three other concerns that I want to point out towards. Many amongst the Muslims, as we've heard before, they're not too aware about this topic. I've made several presentations at different mosques and different communities, and I have different papers that I've written, and I've been on radio shows in the Muslim community and on TV shows, etc. And I always get the question after these presentations that we didn't know about this. Where can we find more information? And we thought this was totally against the teachings of Islam. So there's a lot of ignorance, and we need to continue to create the awareness. And because of this ignorance, there's some consistent questions that come about. So one is that, okay, I'm a Muslim, and my faith is of a certain, ideology or a certain perspective. And would it be possible for me to take an organ of a person who may not be a Muslim? So as they say, we all bleed the same. When it comes to our beliefs, and when it comes to our religions, or even if a person doesn't believe in any religion, when it comes to our organs and as human beings, we all share one thing. We are all part of this community, as we call humanity. And the references from the source text also explain that the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him, said, we all come from one. and that is Adam and Eve. Adam and Hawa, as we say in Arabic, Adam and Eve, and we are all their offspring. So really, we're all brothers and sisters. We're all from the same, forefathers and ancestors going back to Adam and Eve. So therefore, we can definitely share the organs, even if the person's organ is from an individual who may not share our own faith. Another thing here is the burial is not significantly delayed. So what this means is that, in Islam, there's a perspective that as soon as someone passes away, we should try and bury the deceased as soon as possible, immediately. In fact, in some of the Muslim countries, what we have is that within 3 hours or so, once a person passes away, within 3 hours or so, the whole process of washing the body, shrouding the body, doing the funeral prayer, and completing the burial process, it takes place within that 3 hour span. And in this part of the world, at the mosque where I serve, we have a whole funeral service, and usually within 24 hours, the matter is taken care of. So the question that generally comes about from the community is that, okay, there's this process of delaying the burial because we're going to harvest the organ from the deceased. So if I consent to my organs being utilized after my demise, then perhaps my funeral will take place after a week or after 2 weeks or after a month. But the reality of the matter, and as experts tell us, that there's a certain time frame in order for an organ to actually be utilized to save life, and that's why it's done immediately, and there's not much of a delay. And again, the whole process of even if there is a slight delay, it's for a higher purpose and a higher objective, and that is to save life. So there is not a significant delay. The last point I have from the stipulations or the concerns here is that the incisions, so the incisions during the organ harvest, which I gave reference to earlier, it's not mutilation. Again, this has been debated and discussed, that there's a tremendous honor for the human being. So if we're going to make the incisions, it's going to lead to dishonoring the human or mutilation. Again, this is not the case. The incisions are for a higher purpose, and that is to save life. And it's not done with the intent of harming the human or dishonoring or disrespecting the human being. Now, as I head towards my conclusion, I just want to give reference to the Canadian Council of Imams. So I've been part of the Canadian Council of Imams. This is one of the organizations here in Canada that is a collection or an assembly of various imams from across Canada, and the office is based here in Toronto. So we've actually worked with Ontario, Service Ontario, as well as Trillium Health, and we have created a brochure. And some key organizations there, including the mosque that I serve at, have approved this. And again, this is to create awareness. So these are readily available, distributed at various mosques, and by reading it, it gives an idea of what the Islamic perspective is, as well as if someone has further questions, they can get in touch with one of the imams within the Canadian regions, wherever it may be. And also, if they would like a presentation at their mosque, etc., we could assign an appropriate imam to conduct that presentation. We've also done some presentations to some health experts. And again, this is all to create that awareness and the whole objective of saving and protecting life through the organ donation program. And as I said earlier, I've written a few papers and a few Islamic documents on this theme and this topic. So those can be found on my website at mathaba.org, where I do some of my teaching to the youth. And that basically concludes my presentation. I hope it broadened some of the horizons, and I pray that the Almighty accept our efforts. And I look forward to hearing feedback from the participants, and any questions or concerns that you may have from anything I may have discussed or said. I'd be happy to answer them and give a response to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Imam Badat, for placing these contemporary questions in a historical and juridical context. A reminder to those who have donated, well, thank you to anyone who has donated a part of yourself, but a reminder to those of you who have just joined us live, you can go to slido.com and submit questions using the event code AM4. Now, Pandit Sharma is going to share a Hindu faith leader's perspective.
Thank you. Before I start, what's our time check like?
We are right on time.
Good. Well, good morning and namaste, everyone. That was the most enlightening presentation by the two speakers previously. Dr. Asim, the extensive work that you and your organization have done, and also here in Canada, tells us about the depth of your community's commitment towards this program of organ donation. I must confess that I cannot say that to the best of my knowledge, that the Hindu community is committed in a structured approach of any nature to encourage people to make organ donation. Having said that, we live in a society where this is a reality and people are becoming aware of it, that donating their organs can have value, not only to their immediate family members, but to the community at large and to the world. There are quite a few things that are maybe prohibiting people to connect to these things. It only comes to a reality when it hits close to home. My father, my sister, my brother needs an organ, then I'm aware of it. But beyond that, there's no community effort where someone is on a podium or a pulpit or making a presentation on a Sunday morning at a mosque or a mandir for that matter that talks about, hey, everybody, let's think about donating our organs. It's not a subject for discussion from the Hindu perspective. But when it does happen, someone dies in the community or a situation comes up that a special need is there, the word goes about and people get all maybe emotional about it, and then it goes down again until the next event. Our community have certain, what I would call, unwritten constraints, traditions, culture, faith beliefs, and of course, the human emotional. Should I give a body? Will we desecrate the body? It's my child, it's my brother, it's my wife, it's my husband. We don't want to do this. But as far as my knowledge goes, and we've done some work on this, the Hindu tradition or religion and belief have nothing against the donation of organs of any form. The concept is, if what I possess can help someone else to live or to be better, then I'm making a great sacrifice. So that's a very, very general statement. Taking that as a foundation, Hinduism has nothing against organ transplant or donation. And even as science progresses, STEM research and so on, all of these things are part of the white paper that has to be addressed. So we have no issues about it. What we do need is we need a strong commitment within our community. I want to compliment the Center for Living Organ Donation for this extensive work that they've been doing, because I've been contacted about a year ago and then again now, and they continue to work. And I think the more we work at this, the more we expose the activities of this organization, the more the world learns about the need and the value of this. It's the only way that we can convince any community, any faith community or any human being, that your contribution by donating your organ, if it keeps you healthy and safe at the same time, has value. How we go about this, I would use the word maybe very carefully, marketing might be a key factor, because we need to present this need in such a way that it appeals to the basic emotions and goodness of humanity. And regardless of our faith tradition, we are appealing to the human spirit, that you can give, and what you give will save another life, or what you give will make another life better, or you will lose nothing when you give. If anything, you will grow as a person, that you've given of yourself to make the life of someone else better. So these philosophies, I believe, must be a key foundation for those who promote this concept. or those who market this concept. And it must be done in such a way that it has no barriers or no boundaries to cross because of religious belief. I think we throw religion into the mix many times and saying the religion is a cause of us wanting to or not wanting to. I think the genuine human nature to be good is there regardless of our religious belief. And if we do not have a religious belief, we're living in a world where having no religious belief is also something that's very popular. So we need to appeal to the general human population from the goodness of their heart to do what has to be done. So I have no facts, no reviews, no any in-depth work that was done in the Hindu community to support any arguments that I'm making. I'm expressing a personal opinion, but I do believe that after this meeting, I've been given the push to talk to community leaders and to set up a forum whereby I may invite representatives from this organization to present to them the basic foundations of how this works, what are the pros and cons, how we can get engaged. And maybe with that effort, we can have something going forward where the Hindu community will be engaged in a much more profound way to making the community understand the value of contributing organs, not only kidney, but all organs. And that's the depth of my presentation today. And I thank you all for allowing me to listen. And I'm sure there's a lot more to learn. And I look forward to being part of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Pandit Sharma. Hearing some common themes today across the different faith traditions. Keep the questions coming on Slido, and we are now going to turn to Esther Dick and John Anhang to tell us a little bit about the story of renewal in Ontario and what the Jewish faith has to say about organ donation. I'm sorry, John, I see your mouth speaking, but I'm not hearing anything. Is everyone else getting audio? I think you may be on mute.
Is that better?
There we go.
Okay, thank you. Okay, for people who did not have the benefit of reading my biography on the website for this morning's event, let me give a brief introduction of myself. I'm the founder and director of Renewal Toronto. We are a nonprofit organization that works in Toronto's Jewish community to facilitate living kidney donations. Let me for a moment just focus on that. We do living kidney donations. We are, it's a very specific segment of the transplant world. We only deal with kidneys and we only deal with living donations. There are a number of reasons for that, but perhaps most notably, we find that when we focus on one area, we can be more successful in that area. So we don't deal with deceased donations and we don't deal with donations of other organs. We're about living kidney donations. Renewal Toronto is a branch of Renewal New York. Renewal New York was set up within the Jewish community in New York City about 13 years ago. They are a very successful organization, and to date they have been involved and they've facilitated more than 600 donations, 600 kidney donations, living kidney donations. About 11 years ago, I became aware of someone who was in need of a kidney through Renewal New York, and I myself traveled to New York and donated a kidney to someone in need. So I am myself a living kidney donor. When I was going through that process, I thought there must be people within the Jewish community here in Toronto who need a kidney transplant, a kidney donation. And I decided to set up a branch of Renewal here in Toronto. The New York branch discussed it with me and they agreed to that I could set up a branch of their organization here in Toronto. So far, Renewal Toronto, we've been involved in or facilitated more than 30 kidney donations in the Greater Toronto area. Probably half of those have been in the last 3 or 4 years as we really picked up steam in our activities. And as successful as we've been to date, we currently have somewhere between 30 and 40 people still on our waiting list who need kidney transplants. In fact, somehow, the more successful we are, the more people become aware of us and more people go onto our waiting list. I myself am not an employee of Renewal. I volunteer my time to Renewal on a part-time basis. I actually have a separate career. I work in a large company in the finance group. And I volunteer my time mostly in evenings and weekends, and sometimes on my lunch hour. I do have a colleague, Mrs. Esther Dick, who is a paid employee of the organization, and you'll hear from her shortly. At Renewal Toronto, we do three things. We do three things. One is we educate Toronto's Jewish community about living kidney donation. Most people in society, unfortunately, are just not aware of the potential for living kidney donation. And we spend a lot of time building awareness and doing education. The second thing that we do is that we help kidney patients who are looking for a donor. They're usually on dialysis, but not necessarily all the time. We help them find living kidney donors. As medical experts will say, it is better for a kidney patient to get a living kidney donor than a deceased donor, and better to get the kidney as soon as possible, obviously. And therefore, that is part of our mission, is to help kidney patients find living kidney donors as quickly as possible. The third thing that we do is that we guide and support living kidney donors through the entire process of testing. Actually, let me back up, not just testing, making their decision in the first place, whether to donate a kidney, and then testing, and then the surgery, and then through the recovery. One of our mottos, one of our slogans, as I like to say, is the donor is king. So donors need a lot of help going through the process. Typically, donors are very healthy people who don't have a lot of experience with the healthcare system, and they don't know what to expect if they decide to embark on the journey of being a kidney donor. So a big part of what we do is really guide and support living kidney donors. These three things that we do, Esther Dick will elaborate upon them in a few minutes. There's one other thing I'd like to speak about before I turn the floor over to Esther. I'd like to speak about the Jewish perspective on living kidney transplants. I'm not a rabbi, but I'd like to think that I've learned a bit. And Renewal does work very closely with rabbinical authorities, with rabbis in our work. So I'm going to give a very brief synopsis. Jewish tradition and law stresses the importance, the sanctity of human life, and therefore the importance of saving a person's life when they are in danger. In fact, there's a positive commandment in the Bible to save a person's life. Now, this is not at all cost. The person who's saving someone's life should not put themselves at significant risk. There's no point saving someone's life if a person dies in the process. There's no net gain. When kidney transplant started, I believe in the 1950s, it was a relatively high-risk surgery. And the risk declined slowly over time as it became more popular. And by the time we got to probably the 1980s, and the 1990s, living kidney donation is a relatively low-risk surgery. Perhaps, and I'm not a medical expert, perhaps having no more significant risk than a knee or hip replacement or hernia surgery and so on. It is low risk. There's always some risk, of course, but it is low risk. Consequently, today, well, over I'd say the last 20 years at least, but certainly today, all types of Jewish rabbis and religious authorities and scholars permit and encourage and applaud living kidney donation. The subject of living kidney donation is, I'd say, a settled issue, a completely settled issue within Jewish thought today. And this is certainly part of what drives us forward, is that it is a recommended and applauded activity to do. However, there is a lack of community awareness and education regarding living kidney donation. And that's why of the three things that we do at Renewal, that's the first one, is really to build awareness. In terms of, and I'll just digress for 1 minute, in terms of deceased kidney transplants, the Jewish thought is not quite as aligned and decided on the subject of deceased kidney transplants, which is part of the reason that we focus on living kidney transplants. We want to deal in an area where everyone agrees, and we want to deal in an area that helps people today. Being a living kidney donor saves someone's life today. Being a deceased kidney donor, I'm not saying it shouldn't be done. I'll just say it potentially saves a person's life at some point in the future. If one passes away in a manner that permits the harvesting of the kidney to give to a patient, then that's successful. Otherwise, the person does not become a deceased kidney donor. So as we say, why wait till you're dead to save a life? You can save a life right now by being a living kidney donor. Let me turn the floor over to Esther Dick to talk about the activities that we do. And then after she speaks, I will pick up again just to conclude our presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Esther Dick, and I am one example of someone who, because of renewal, became aware of and learned about kidney donation and was inspired to be a kidney donor myself. Donating a kidney has been one of the more meaningful highlights of my life. I now work for Renewal as an assistant to John Anhang. I find it very gratifying to be involved in such a worthwhile endeavor. In the next few minutes, I'll discuss exactly what it is that Renewal does. As John has mentioned just before, in a nutshell, we do number one, we educate and raise awareness regarding living kidney donation. Number two, we help the kidney patients find living donors and support them during the process. Number three, we support and assist the kidney donors from the time they show interest in becoming a donor through the testing phase, surgery, recovery, and beyond. I would like to now elaborate on each of those three functions. Regarding awareness and education, Renewal employs several methods to raise awareness about live kidney donation. What we find most effective is hosting renewal events in synagogues across the GTA. Events are engaging and informative. Typically, a donor will be invited to give a speech about his or her own personal experience, and then someone at Renewal will speak and then answer questions from the audience. Recipients and donors in attendance usually participate in the conversation. Educational and inspirational literature is available, as are refreshments, of course. For many Renewal donors, this is the first step in their journey towards becoming a donor. Renewal also publicizes the idea of live kidney donation to the Jewish community in the GTA via advertisements in Jewish publications and by giving interviews to Jewish media. But the best advertisement for the cause is the kidney donor himself. There is no better advocate than a passionate donor. They are encouraged to share their stories privately and publicly. I remember when, after donating my kidney, I was given a Renewal bumper sticker, and I'll show you one of it. And it says, "You're following a live kidney donor." At first, I didn't bother putting it on my car, but after hearing about the importance of sharing our donor experiences, I decided to put that sticker on. I've since had a few occasions where that sticker elicited a thumbs up or conversations with total strangers who saw it. We actually once had someone whose son needed a kidney and came to Renewal for help. She said that while driving, she noticed that bumper sticker on the car in front of her and then promptly Googled Renewal as soon as she got home. Renewal's second mission is to support and assist the kidney patient. The most challenging aspect in this work is by far finding a suitable kidney match for him or her. The first step is meeting with the patient and their family and reassuring them that we are there for them until they're successful in finding a kidney. You cannot imagine the relief they feel when they know that they are not alone. It is actually surprising how many patients have not been proactive in the search for a donor. So our first goal is guiding them in the process of reaching out to family and friends via email campaigns and social media, such as Facebook. We ask that a relative or friend do it on their behalf. This is because patients have enough to worry about without the task of also searching for a donor. Also, it's terribly uncomfortable for somebody to have to beg for a kidney for themselves. Renewal employs a graphic designer who can help create a customized flyer that the patient can post to their profiles. We also act as an intermediary between the donor and patient. This way, people who are interested in exploring the possibility of becoming a donor can remain anonymous until they are fully committed. We also help organize events at the synagogue that the patient attends. We've had a wide range of success with them. Some have resulted in several people coming forth to be donors. and some have resulted in no one coming forth, although one never knows if a seed has been planted in someone's brain that would take years to bear fruit. On one occasion, we had an event that seemed like a dud. The weather was terrible and very few people showed up. But a neighbor of the patient came to that event. Until that evening, he was unaware that his neighbor even needed a kidney. And lo and behold, he ended up becoming his donor. Sometimes we have the patient feature their story in their synagogue newsletter. A few years ago, a woman was reading her synagogue newsletter and came across the story of a synagogue member who needed a kidney. Although she had long moved away and lost touch with her fellow members, she was touched by the article and decided to donate her kidney to this former acquaintance. Needless to say, they are good friends today. When none of these avenues produce any viable results, Renewal also has its own database of potential altruistic donors. When the patient is particularly difficult to match due to a high antibody count, we will broaden our search to New York's Renewal database. They have found matches for patients considered almost impossible to match, with PRA levels over 99%. Renewal's third mission is to support and assist the kidney donor. Some already have a designated recipient, be it a relative or friend. Some do not and are ready to donate to a stranger. Some people come to us already having made up their mind to donate, and some are still exploring that possibility. We set up a meeting with them and their family members to discuss the entire procedure and impart factual information from reliable sources. We never pressure, persuade, or convince anyone to make this big decision. We want to make sure that the donor is entirely confident with their decision. We encourage them to speak to their doctor and to family members who will be impacted by this decision. The last thing we want is for someone to impulsively jump in, doing something that they are unwilling to carry through to the finish line. We then administer a cheek swab, which gets sent to Renewal's lab in New York in order to get their blood type and HLA profile. This information is fed into the Renewal database along with other pertinent data. This is used to determine which patients would be a compatible match, as we also have entered the HLA information of each potential recipient. This is also helpful for when a patient has multiple donor candidates. The database has a program that can determine who is the best HLA match and if there is an issue of antibody rejection. This avoids precious time being lost, having a donor test for a couple of months only to find out at the end that he or she is not a match. Once the donor begins testing, we continue to hold their hand during the entire process. This includes answering any questions they or their family members might come up with, pairing them up with former donors, helping them navigate the testing, driving them to the hospital before surgery, and staying with the family while the surgery is being done. Even long after the transplant, we still stay connected. Renewal has a WhatsApp group for our donors. We host donor appreciation events and dinners to acknowledge and celebrate the people who have selflessly given the gift of life. I will now turn the presentation over back to John Anhang.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you. Renewal Toronto would like nothing more than for similar organizations to exist in other faith communities in the GTA. And as I'll elaborate in a minute, we're willing to help with that. However, before people run off and start setting up their own organizations, I want to just enumerate 7 key success factors that we have at Renewal. So in order for your community, and when I define community, it might be a faith community, it might be a racially based community, an ethnic community, a social community of some sort. So really, I think this model may work for other types of communities as well as faith-based communities. But we believe that you would need 7 things in order to be successful. First one is that your community has to be composed of people who truly care about each other, and people who feel a sense of responsibility for each other. some who would even become an altruistic or a non-altruistic living kidney donor for someone in the community. That's really important. For example, if you had a community of, I don't know, chess players who got together once every 3 months to play chess, those people probably are not high potential living kidney donors for each other. The second success factor, and we heard a lot about this from previous speakers, is that the leaders of the community have to be solidly in support of living kidney donation and in support of the organization in particular. And the leaders have to be willing and ready to stand up and say so consistently over time and in many situations, whether it's speeches, websites, interviews, written articles, and so on. Community leadership must be in support of what is being done. The third one, not surprisingly, success factor is money. No organization succeeds without funding. Fortunately, it doesn't take a lot of money to run an organization like Renewal. Depends what you call a lot, but $50,000 a year can do the trick. So we're not talking about millions or even hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. The fourth key success factor is to have very committed people who work for the organization, who are personally committed to the cause, who it's not just a job for them. They're personally committed and they're willing to be available for patients and for potential donors whenever required, whether it's weekends or evenings. And people are not easily discouraged. This is not an easy road to travel, and you need to have the right people working for your organization. The fifth key success factor is the people in the organization have to be experts about the subject, okay? Because potential donors and patients will look to them to be experts. Experts in things such as who qualifies to be a living kidney donor? What's the process of being a donor from A to Z? What are the risks of being a donor? What are the time commitments and the financial costs of being a donor? What financial assistance is available from various sources to donors? And then they'll have personal questions of their own. So Renewal and other organizations like it have to be prepared to answer those questions or to direct the person to a place where they can get answers. The sixth key success factor that we consider is to have previous living kidney donors, preferably altruistic ones, but certainly living kidney donors from your community who had positive experiences and who are willing to talk about their experiences, both privately and sometimes in public. And Esther mentioned this as well. It lends a lot of credibility to the organization and to the whole notion if people from within the community stand up and talk about their experience. Then it becomes not something that's theoretical or abstract for potential donors. It's something that, hey, if they can do it, why can't I do it? And the last key success factor is to really have long-term thinking and patience. It takes a long time to get this going. You might only facilitate 1 or 2 transplants per year in the early years. There will be obstacles, difficulties, setbacks, disappointments, failures, and some people on the waiting list do pass away before they get a kidney. So people have to have patience and they have to not get discouraged. I would say that an organization setting this up has to commit to the process for at least 2 to 3 years to start seeing real success, and maybe even 3 to 5 years to build a track record, because it takes momentum in terms of awareness and education building in the community, in terms of building a reputation, in terms of building word of mouth amongst donors, as Esther referred to. There are a lot of things that become better with time. And this is not something which will bear results in 6 months or 12 months or 18 months. One has to be prepared to be in it for the long haul. So those are the 7 factors. I don't want to discourage any organization from trying to set something up. The purpose of my mentioning these key success factors is really to say, think about what you're doing before you do it, and then structure your approach to be successful. I would like to end my our presentation, by talking about 3 objectives that we have for the future at Renewal. One is to recover quickly from the COVID-19 suspension of living kidney transplants at hospitals in the GTA. For the obvious needs that hospitals had to deal with and still have to deal with COVID-19, the testing of kidney donors and I think to some extent for kidney patients as well, was suspended. This has set things back tremendously for patients who need kidneys and for donors who are eager to donate a kidney. And we're finally seeing, I'd say in the last few weeks, the last month or so, a resumption of testing. And that's wonderful news. We have to work off the backlog and get these people their kidneys. Our second plan, or at least aspiration for the future, is to figure out how we can work more cooperatively with the hospitals in the GTA who do kidney transplants for the mutual benefit of the patients, the recipients, and of donors. There's a lot of wonderful work done at the hospitals, but as in most areas of human endeavor, there is always room for improvement. And the third thing is that we want to be available to assist other organizations, other community organizations, whether religious, ethnic, racial, social, whatever it is, in the GTA who might want to establish organizations like Renewal Toronto. With just two people involved, myself and Esther, we don't have a lot of resources, but we are willing to donate some time to organizations, to communities who want to try to replicate what we've been fortunate in being able to succeed over the last 10 or 11 years here in the GTA. Thank you for listening.
Thank you both for sharing your model and your practical experiential learnings. A reminder to our audience that questions can be submitted on slido.com using event code AM4. Now we're going to hear from Claudia Morgan, who will highlight her experience as a kidney recipient and a member of a Christian faith community. Claudia,
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay, excellent. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. And as was said before, my name is Claudia Morgan, and I am a kidney transplant recipient of 2 years. To help everyone understand how I came to be on end-stage renal failure, I should give you a little bit about my background so that you'll understand. From an early age, I knew that I had kidney problems. I came from a family of polycystic kidney disease. And for those of you who may not know what that is, it's basically a genetic disorder in which your kidneys become enlarged with fluid-filled cysts. And eventually the cysts become so large that your kidney can no longer function to its full capacity. I started seeing a nephrologist in my early 20s and continued to see my nephrologist for 15 years until the time came when she gave me the diagnosis that I had between 6 months and a year before I would need to go on dialysis. Armed with that information, I decided that I would take one last vacation before it became too difficult to do so. And I expressed to the nephrology team that I wanted to go to Paris, France. And before I did that, I did my usual blood and urine tests, and off I went. When I returned to Toronto, I discovered that I had 13 missed calls from Sunnybrook Hospital. When I listened to my messages, the messages explained that I needed to call the hospital immediately. And I came to find out that while I was on vacation, my kidney function had dropped below 10%. I was immediately prepped for process of getting a fistula. Unfortunately, none of my 2 fistula surgeries or my graft took, as my veins were too small. I was then fitted for a port, and I decided to share my journey with my church family. And when I did that, I was immediately approached by Pastor Joel about making a video to share my experience. I found the video to be actually quite freeing, as I fully expected to spend the rest of my remaining years on dialysis. Little did I know that nearly a year later, I would be approached by my nephrologist about the idea of doing a kidney transplant, and in particular, living transplant donation. The idea had never occurred to me. How would one go about getting a kidney? How do you even open the subject about this? Well, I mentioned this conversation with my mom, and immediately she volunteered to get tested. And so the process began. Weeks later, we discovered that through the testing process that my mom had diabetes and she didn't even know it. Along with two other individuals who stepped forward to be tested, none of them were a match. At that point, I felt like I had no other options. Uh, I didn't feel like I could ask for such a sacrificial gift. Frustrated, feeling defeated, I expressed my concerns to my church family. And little did I know that the video that Pastor Joel made would be my social media advocate about life on dialysis and my need for a kidney transplant. Several shares later, my video ends up in the hands of Valerie, who is a Canadian missionary and a former member of our church stationed in Okinawa, Japan. Valerie was so moved by Joel's video that she decided to write a post and a call to action by all our fellow Christians to go forward and get tested. She herself stepped forward to get tested. Well, now my video ends up in the hands of Julia. And Julia is a registered nurse in Toronto and also happens to be Valerie's younger sister. Julia decides to prey on the decision and decides that she would like to step forward and get tested. Unbeknownst to me, Julia starts the extensive process of physical and mental testing. And months later, I receive an email from Julia introducing herself and letting me know that the transplant team has decided to stop testing any further candidates as they believe that she and myself are a viable match. Well, I am happy to say that in May 22nd of 2018, Julia gave me the gift of life, and we both have been thriving ever since. So what does my life look like now? Well, I am back to working full time, and my spare time is used volunteering with the Transplant Ambassador Program. This program connects transplant recipients and donors with patients who are currently in kidney care clinics or on dialysis. We don't provide medical information, but we do provide support by sharing our experiences, opening up dialogue with living donorship, and answering those questions that patients are too afraid or embarrassed to ask their medical team. Who better to understand the journey of someone who's on dialysis or going to be on dialysis than someone who's already been there as well? It's probably the most rewarding work that I've done so far, but yet there's still so much more work that needs to be done. That's why I love sessions like this, because we can share our ideas, share our experiences, and help one another. And I'm hoping that my story will do the same. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll pass it on to Pastor Joel.
Thanks. It's good to see that you're doing well.
Thank you.
Pastor Joel, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, everyone. It's been great hearing all these diverse perspectives and expertise and lived experience. Thank you, Claudia, for inviting me into your story and for giving me the opportunity to share my gifts. And it's amazing that a match was found, a viable match was found for you through a video. I'd just like to say hello to Pastor Bruce, who is a senior pastor at our church currently. I'm not on staff as a pastor, but I still serve as an unpaid pastor. We call that an elder at our church, and it's a blessing to be a part of this conversation. Just to give a little bit of a Christian framework for my personal involvement, I can't speak much to broader Christian involvement in some of the others have spoken about, the Christian faith really does hold high the concept of the sanctity of human life. And, we value life and the preservation of life. And so any opportunity to come alongside someone in their journey, their health journey, is a privilege and a blessing. And as well, one of the key motivating factors for us as Christians is a love that we find modeled in the person of Jesus, who we believe to be God, and he really models for us and compels us and motivates us in all we do. And we understand that love to be a sacrificial love that's demonstrated for us through the way that Jesus, out of love, died for us. And so sacrificial love is motivating factor for myself, and it was also a motivating factor for the person who ended up being the match for Claudia. And it continues to motivate us as we interact with each other.
I'm sorry, I think the mic is picking up some background noise instead of the speaker's voice. If everyone could make sure that they're on mute if you're not speaking.
Hopefully that wasn't my mic, so I'm sure that Pastor Bruce will help to fill in some other key points. But for me, being able to come alongside Claudia and tell her story, I didn't really have any expectations of a match being found, but it was really an act of love and spending the time to listen to her and share her story. And it was incredible to see how the advocacy work of just putting a video online and it being shared by others, how that could result in a life-changing match with Claudia. So that's, I believe there is if anyone's interested in watching that video of Claudia, they can contact UHN. I've provided them with the link, or maybe they will, Jed, I'm not sure it's how you'll share that, but you do have the link, so it's available for anyone to see if they'd like to watch it at a later date.
Thank you for offering that. We'll see how we can provide it to our audience.
Okay. And yeah, that's all that I have to share now. I'll pass it over to Pastor Bruce.
Well, a great opportunity to speak to you today, and I'm thankful for what God has done in the situation that we found ourselves in. Myself are experts in this whole thing. Claudia herself is not an expert either, but as Joel said, we're really centering in on the sanctity of human, the sacrifice. And our motivation indeed is love. We want to have the same motivation that motivated Christ, a willingness to give one's others. And for us, it goes beyond intellect, it goes beyond study, it goes beyond theory. It's very practical, and the mission for us was a very emotional one and a day-to-day one. The question came for our faith community, for our church: how do we support this lady and her family? And in the midst of this really wild and difficult situation, and really I discovered through going through this over that we went through this with Claudia, that there's a number of factors at play, and one is we can never underestimate the value of hope. Hope is so important. Hope does not disappoint, and you can hang on through a lot of stuff if you have this feeling of hope and this realization that you're part of a greater plan. And so I saw this hope at work in Claudia's life, where she was willing to step through whatever was going to face her, simply because she knew that she could trust that ultimately that God was in control, and she could have hope. there was also this perspective, I think, that a faith community can bring, and that we talk about all the time in the Christian community, is that beyond this life we have hope for eternity, and that's part of our hope, is this sense that this life is not all there is, and so it was a great opportunity to walk with Claudia through that, and she was a great example to others through that, and she herself was such an encouragement to so many other people as she was walking through her own difficult situation. But this perspective that that I can keep putting one foot in front of the other, because this life isn't all there is. In our church as well, I saw this beautifully at play, the beauty of the extended family, which you get in a faith community. This extended family, Joel and Claudia have known each other for decades. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think they basically grew up together in this congregation. They're like brother and sister, and so to see that kind of extended family walking through things with each other together was a beautiful thing, and it was just wonderful to see how that worked out. And the extended family has grown even more now, because essentially Julia has become Claudia's sister as well, and the two of them sort of think of themselves as sisters, because they share a lot more than a lot of relationships do, and so they are sisters themselves. So this extended family is just a beautiful thing to work together. And I think probably one of the other areas that was a significantly wonderful area is the importance of prayer in the midst of all of this. And I've noticed that one of the questions has to do with the importance of prayer in this whole process, and our church can definitely say that that we had dozens of people motivated to pray on a regular basis for Claudia, and also for Julia, as we became aware that Julia was going to be the donor. But prayer does change things. Not that we can manipulate God, because I say all the time to our congregation that God is not a cosmic vending machine, where if we put the right little coins in the vending machine, he will spit out exactly what we want. He doesn't work that way. We cannot manipulate God, but prayer helps to align ourselves with the will and the purposes of God. Though he's not a cosmic vending machine, he loves us, and he is gracious, and he is perfect, and he wants to respond to the trusting prayers of his people. And we saw that, and I just want to say we give him all the glory and all the thanks, because in this case, as we brought Claudia's prayers before him, he answered. And you see this shining example before you today of somebody whose life has been given a second chance. And along the way, as we bring our prayers to God, ultimately we have to submit to his will being done. And that was the base of our prayers all the time. Lord, this is what we would like to see. This is what we ask you for, but ultimately we are willing to submit to your will and to what you want, because we do believe that you are working for your honor and glory and for the good of your people, and so we trust you. So anyway, it's a wonderful story, and I was just so privileged to be able to have a tiny itty bitty part of it by visiting Claudia and by praying for the family and encouraging the congregation to do so. But we can just rejoice as we see the end result and what's come out the other side. So like I say, we're not experts in any way, shape, or form, but we simply just say thank you, God. I'll leave it at that.
I think that whether one is a person of faith or not, working in this field, you gain an appreciation for the preciousness of life, but also for what we can do as people and communities. Since we're running a little ahead of schedule, I'm hoping that the people in control of our technology can run the video elaborating on Claudia's story.
I'm a designer, and I'm a florist and a manager.
I need to do dialysis because my kidney function has diminished and it's no longer functioning the way it should be. So the condition that I have is called polycystic kidney disease, and it's a genetic disease. So I inherited from my paternal side of my family. Kidney disease does wear on the body. It makes you extremely tired to the point where, you know, at end stage renal failure, you constantly are tired, you need to sleep. You really have to fight with yourself not to get depressed, to try and maintain some normalcy, because if not, your whole life could be involved in just thinking you're sick and not wanting to participate in life, and there's so much going on in the world.
A year ago, one of my greatest needs was to find a kidney donor. My kidney function was down to 7%, and I was on the verge of starting dialysis. I started dialysis last April, so it's officially been 1 year that I've been on dialysis. The dialysis machine does the job that my kidneys can no longer do. I have to go for dialysis treatments where I'm connected to this machine 3 times a week, and each time I'm connected for 4 hours. So it's 12 hours a week. You created a video for me, and once you did that video, I posted it on my Facebook page in the hopes that someone would watch it and maybe feel compelled to want to get tested. A dear friend of mine saw the video that I posted and wanted to share it on her Facebook page. And in doing so, wanted to have a call to action from her friends and her family to get tested to be a possible donor. So my friend was Valerie Limmer, and she's actually a dear friend of mine. We've gone to Willowdale Baptist Church for many years together, and Valerie is now a missionary all the way in Japan. When Valerie posted the video, several people were moved by her call to action. One of those people being her own sister, Julia. So Julia sent me a message through Facebook inquiring what did this getting tested entail, and we communicated basically through Valerie. I didn't think anything of it until probably several months later when Julia told me that she did her blood type and her blood type was the same as mine. So at that point, the ball started to get rolling. And even then, it's not 100% certain that everything else will be a match because it's a very lengthy procedure to get tested. So during the course of probably another 6 or 7 months, Julia slowly started doing her testing through medical and everything else. And then she told me that she was finally approved to be a donor for me. When I heard that Valerie Limmer's sister Julia was a match to me, I was overwhelmed. It's a miracle. That's nothing more than God's hand in this one. So this is literally like a 1 in a million opportunity that's been given to me. Knowing that somebody is willing to make that sort of sacrifice to you makes you feel truly blessed, because that's not an easy thing to give. There are people out there who have difficulty giving money or giving of their time, yet someone to give of an organ, that's There's no words to thank someone for that. Well, they can be praying for me in several ways. They can be praying that God will guide the surgeon's hands when they go for the surgery. Also pray that both Julie and I stay healthy as we go in for surgery, because we still have several more weeks to go. And also pray that God will provide the funding that will help cover some of the expenditures that come along with doing a transplant. When someone gives of themselves so selflessly, there's a lifelong bond that can never be broken. So I don't want to get emotional. I can't thank her enough. This is such a selfless sacrifice, and I'm truly appreciative for everything that she's done for me. And she's done it so willingly and always with a smile.
That it was very moving as well as informational. I am now going to hand the mic over to Courtney Mort from the Center for Living Donation, who I believe will be facilitating the Slido questions.
Thanks, Jed. So our first question here is to Renewal. Many individuals are concerned about sharing health information with others or with larger communities. How frequently do you encounter that? How do you help such people? Esther, are you able to take this question?
Sure. Well, first of all, we're not really involved that much in the itty-bitty details of their health information. When we have a donor come forth, they just have to fill out a form and just ask a few questions about their health, but that's just to screen them whether or not they'd be eligible to be a donor. Simple questions like, do you have diabetes or high blood pressure, etc. And obviously all this information is held to the utmost confidentiality. As far as the patient, the kidney patient, also, we're not involved with all their medical details. It's really, we're not really part of that process. And any information we have also there with the patient is in total confidentiality.
All right, anything to add on to that? Okay, we can move on to the next question then. Are there organizations for Renewal, like Renewal, for other faith communities?
I'm not exactly sure, but I believe in New York City, the Renewal organization there is working with other communities.
Right, and can anyone on the panel speak to maybe anything similar to Renewal that they know of, just to help the audience?
Well, some of the aspects of what we do is already being done by UHN. For example, they have the ambassador program. I'm not, each community does a lot. We've heard from leaders this morning from other communities, and they're obviously doing a lot of what we're doing.
Okay, thanks. So let's open this question up to anyone. Please chime in if you have anything to say. We hear a lot about the power of prayer. Did this play a role in your transplant journey? And if so, how? Claudia, I feel like this one's probably a good place for you to chime in.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. So, absolutely, the power of prayer did play a role in my journey for two simple reasons. One, I grew up in a family where if people know my mom, they say my mom is a prayer warrior. My mom prays without ceasing. And so, without a doubt, there was no question that we couldn't have taken this journey without prayer and without the role of my church family as part of that. I think, as touching a little bit on what Pastor Bruce said, um, part of hope is knowing that by praying and praying without ceasing, that something will come of it. We don't know what, we don't know how, but something will come of it. And that's what keeps you going in some of the darkest hours. So, I mean, that's sort of what I can say on that one.
Does anyone else want to add in anything? Obviously not maybe for your specific journey, but just kind of how you would advise people to kind of use prayer when they're in a difficult situation. All right. So next question here, again for renewal. When you talk about your waiting list, how do you determine who is on your list and the order of the list? How do you make sure it's fair to everyone who is hoping to receive a transplant?
It looks like we have a couple of questions about the renewal model. So John and Esther, if you would be so kind, let's try to go through them one by one.
Sure, maybe I'll handle this one. So how we determine who's on our list is basically patients who contact us and who ask for help in finding a donor. Once they fill out a basic form with basic demographic information so we know who they are, and some very basic health information, such as are they on dialysis, how long have they been on dialysis, if they're not yet on dialysis, what are their creatinine numbers and other numbers. It's just some basic information to understand where they are in the process of kidney disease. They're put on our list. We have several different lists, if you will. There are people who have already been approved, tested and approved by the hospital for a transplant. And those are people who we're certainly looking for a donor for, and we help. There are people who are currently being tested by the hospital. There are people who are not sick enough yet to be tested by the hospital. There are people on dialysis and on dialysis. We actually have several sublists, if you will. How we determine the order of the list and how we're fair. So there are really two components to that. One is that it's when we get first of all, many people on our list are looking for donors on their own with our assistance. And clearly, if they find a donor on their own, then their donor will take care of them, so that they're taken care of off the list in that method. But generally, with two principles. One is chronological, and in religious context, I will say that the principles for priority on our list have been determined in conjunction with rabbis in this area. And it's something that both Renewal Toronto and Renewal New York follow. So in cases of any questions or doubts, we do consult with religious authorities. But generally speaking, there are two criteria. One is it's chronological. The person who came on the list earlier gets the kidney earlier. The other one is medical compatibility, how good a match is someone, and that's based on blood type and on HLA. I hope that answers the question. So we try to make it as fair to everyone as possible.
Great, thank you. This next one here is kind of related to the question that was already asked, but it has a bit of maybe we can answer that question in a bit more detail, and it has a little bit at the end that's slightly different. So again, for renewal, please discuss the voluntary nature of potential donors sharing their health data in your database. Also, please mention how your information will be balanced with the medical decision process.
So as Esther mentioned a few minutes ago, we actually collect very little health data. We don't need it, and frankly, we don't want it. We don't want to have more confidential information than is absolutely necessary. And in terms of how it will be managed in the medical decision process, in terms of the decision process of the hospital and the patient's own medical professionals, we are not involved in that. So there is no interaction between us and the patients or the donors, medical, doctors and so on, the medical system. So any information that's given to us is very limited in scope, as I said, and is used solely for the purpose of making tentative matches, and then it's really turned over to the healthcare system to take it from there.
Great. Thank you. Claudia, how did you convince yourself to keep participating in life when you were sick?
Well, that's a good question. One of the things that I often say to people is I didn't realize how sick I was until I started to feel better. And I touch on that simply because at the time, kidney illness was just a regular part of my life. So I knew nothing different. I knew that I had to basically go to work as much as I could. I knew that I wanted to keep some level of normalcy in my life. So it was more of just survival mode. I still had a life that I wanted to lead, and I did everything that I could possibly do, whether it was work, go to church, visit with friends, to keep my life as normal as possible, even in the midst of dialysis.
Thank you. Okay, next question. This is for everyone. I do not belong to a particular church, temple, etc. Are there still ways that I can use faith communities to help me find a live donor? Does anyone want to chime in for this question? Don't all jump at once.
Well, let me reframe it a bit. Have you ever run into any challenges defining who is a part of your church family or your faith community? Or do these things just kind of sort themselves out organically? There's a great need out there for both kidneys and livers, and I'm wondering how you choose where to focus.
Maybe for renewal, I'll try to answer the question. So we have had people who are not members of the Jewish community in Toronto approach us for assistance, and we have helped them. And at least one or two of them have gotten kidneys with our assistance. We don't discriminate against anyone on the basis of their faith. However, we don't have the resources to work with the whole city of Toronto, the whole GTA. I was asked several years ago to give a television interview, and I declined it because I said that if too many people find out about renewal, we will simply be overwhelmed. Our hands are really full dealing with people who know about us within the Jewish community. If someone approaches us from another faith community, we'll certainly try to help them. But we have very limited resources.
Anyone else? All right. Is there consensus within different faiths as to whether transplant is permissible? If not, what are the arguments against transplant? If allowed, can we use religious institutions to raise awareness in their respective communities about transplant giving low donations?
Perhaps I'll chime in for a second on that one, and then I
Sure.
can let the religious scholars sort of speak about that. So one thing I'll say is that, and oftentimes this gets conflated, but that we should think about the act of donation as separate from the act of transplantation. As ethicists said, two different moral actions, right? Donating is an individual donating an organ with the hopes of a possible benefit for someone else, while transplantation, in this case, is the recipient, right? Who is facing a bad choice of either I die potentially, if it's a life-saving treatment, or I have a very diminished sort of living, quality of living, or diminished flourishing, if I don't have a transplant. And so there are two different moral actors, two different moral contexts. And while oftentimes when religious scholars kind of deliver information, and this happens in the Muslim community as well, we link them together because they're linked, because you can't necessarily have transplantation at this time without donation, but they're two different moral agents and two different moral contexts. With that said, so let me speak on the transplantation part, right? So just take for a second as an ethicist, or as a clinician, as someone who's religiously literate, my choices are that I could either have as you just heard the story, I could be on dialysis, and have a diminished quality of living and perhaps not be able to provide for my family or be with my family the way I like, and have increased risks of various sort of complications from dialysis long term. Or I could pursue getting a living donor from my kith and kin. There would be some potential challenges to that, matching and whatnot, but I could do either of those two options. Which option would I opt for? So religious scholars might say, well, either is permissible, speaking of most of the context, right? But it depends on the context that you want to pursue. Now, for some people, clinically, we know that transplantation is not going to afford them increased life expectancy, probably, as opposed to dialysis. And then it's an equal act, right? But for a child, if you imagine a child who's 15 or 12, and they have the same disease that you heard about, polycystic kidney disease, and they need transplantation, there is an afforded, we believe, although God's in control, a longer longevity of life with a transplant potentially than with a dialysis. So why I say that is that then the scholar might say, well, perhaps you should choose that as the first option as opposed to second. Now, the third option would be, I'm not going to die either. I'm just going to allow myself to die because that's the body God gave me. And the scholar might say, well, perhaps that is some interpretation that one should be cautious about. Now, I don't want to speak out of religious turn, but you could see how there would be different contexts even in the transplantation idea, right? Depending on who the individual is. So I'm sharing that because I want people to bring much more nuance than just say, is there consensus even within a faith tradition? Because each context brings about a different choice. Depending on the choice, there are different views on how we can think about transplantation's permissibility or impermissibility. And I'll give you an example as impermissible, or someone had mentioned as impermissible. The only way to get an organ would be to have someone die. Like, so for example, prisoners in China. Would you say, yeah, it's fine to get a transplantation, but that's the prominent source of transplants, that we cure organs? In this case, I would use the more bad condition, harvest organs from people who have limited agency to give freely. That's the only organ source. Would you then say that transplantation of that organ into your body is permissible? And some would say that it's not religiously. So you see it becomes much more nuanced. Anyway, I hope I've clarified that. The last piece I'll just mention very, very briefly here. As a part, I would also want to caution against the idea of co-opting faith. So the question was, can we use religion to raise awareness about transplant? I think that's a laudable goal. That's part of the project that I did, to raise awareness, to raise knowledge, to increase knowledge. But the idea of, okay, well, it's religiously more, I would like to see religious communities on a spectrum. A person who's religious can say, I can see myself in various sort of contexts, and there might be plurality within the faith, rather to just say, okay, well, religion tells you should do this. And there are sometimes people say, the higher goal is to always donate your organs, to be altruistic, to have agape, all these sorts of things. There is almost no faith that I know of that says there's a singular position. So I'd rather keep people within the fold and say there are many ways to think about this. You have to discern for yourself what is right for you. And the ultimate day of judgment, if you believe in that, you're going to be the one responsible, as opposed to have a singular univocal approach to this, because no text that I know of and no human interpretation can be just univocal, particularly in areas such as this has so much nuance. So sorry I gave an academic spin to that, but I want you to feel there's much more nuance than these singular tropes that we bring out often.
Can I chime in on this also, Pandit Sharma?
Oh, I'm sorry, go on.
Definitely we should use whatever powers we have to engage the religious community. And I agree with the previous speaker that there's no one doctrine that says this is the way it will be. And there will never, ever be one doctrine in any religious group or even across the board. But definitely we need to educate the religious community. And the reason we need to educate the religious community and capitalize on them, they are definitely already a group that gathers. They have an open audience that can always be communicated with. You see these people every week, you can relate to them, you know them, you can talk to them. So it's a very, very, I would say, a captured audience that we have. And as religious leaders, we can take the liberty to present the situation to them in a very, very simplistic way, not from a clinical point of view, but from a humanistic point of view. And I think we need to capitalize on this as much as we can, and not let it become something that, okay, religion A is doing it and religion B is not doing it, and why shouldn't C do it? But let it be a human thing that we all need to do. And definitely we should do this. Thank you.
There are a lot of basically secular institutions in North America, both governmental and non-governmental, that are interested in promoting both awareness of organ donation and promoting organ donation as a public good. Beyond what you've already said, do any of you have any thoughts on how these organizations might partner with faith communities in a way that is not seen as manipulative of the faith? I know, Dr. Padella, you shared a brochure, but I'm wondering if any of you have any other thoughts on what are appropriate ways, if any, of referencing religion or faith communities when interacting with those for whom that's an important part of their life.
That will have to be whereby consultation and some formal consensus to come back that, let's say, I'm representing the Hindu Federation right now, and that is a body that attempts to represent the Hindu community across Canada. Now, it doesn't mean that we are the only body that makes that claim, but having such a declaration from such body saying that this group has given consensus that from all religious concept we see nothing wrong with this would be a great testament to, okay, that you have some kind of a support from the Hindu community on this initiative. So I would say, yes, we need to do that. We need to work with the faith groups at maybe at a higher level rather than the individual on the street level, because all faith groups have quote unquote a corporate structure. And I will sit here and say something, but when I get back to the board, I might have a different opinion given to me. So we need to make sure we are dealing with those bodies, and that all of us can leave here and report back to that body, because one member of a community church on the corner in Mississauga says, yep, we support that. And the board says, like, no way we do. And here we are back to square one. So we should convene a gathering of those powers to be and get their consensus at that level, like Canadian Council of Catholic Bishops, the Council of Imams, the Hindu Federation. At that level, this meeting should be at. And then you will have a different perspective. And also you will have the opportunity to influence leaders of community across the GTA, because those organizations at those levels represent a wider scope of people. So I would say what we are doing today is a great initiative, but we need to move up the ladder a couple of steps to get to the right people that we need, the decision makers and the people who are going to movers and shakers to make things happen. Thank you.
Thanks for fleshing that out a bit. I appreciate that different faith traditions may be organized a bit more or less hierarchically. Do we have any other perspectives on this?
I'd just like to add briefly in support of what was just shared, that part of the organization that I work of, called the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, we're an umbrella Christian group, and we have a representative, staff representative, who sits on an interfaith council, and that interfaith council meets with various other religious leaders, and I do believe that that would be a good platform to bring up this specific issue. So I just suggest any around the table who might be a part of that interfaith council to, or know members who are a part of it, this could be a great topic for future discussion.
So these umbrella organizations are out there, and perhaps even umbrellas around umbrellas. Courtney, do we have any more questions coming in on Slido?
We do, yeah. So this one's obviously pretty simple. Dr. Padella, is there a link to the brochure you shared that we can share on social media?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. I think I shared it with the organizers. But for those that are listening, You can find that brochure if you just go medicineandislam.org. And then under there, there's a health research arm. And if you just find organ donation, there's a whole list of resources of the project that I mentioned, which includes the PowerPoints, the talks that we gave, the papers, and as well as the pamphlet that I mentioned. So it's all on that website. But the domain name is medicineandislam.org. And then under Muslim Health Research, you'll find that specific project, which is called IMLD, I am a living donor. And there's all the materials there that you could want.
Perfect, thank you. So next question, what are the most common fears or concerns you hear from members of your faith regarding living donation? Open to anyone who would like to start.
So I mentioned, I'll just say briefly, I'll let the others speak, but as I mentioned that this notion, and particularly with this might be within my specific community, of the conceptual idea of what is living donation and what is deceased in the quote unquote secular space is based on the notion of brain death. I sort of brought that up. And so within the, for example, prominent communities in Michigan, Shiite communities, they don't consider brain death to be death. So even donation after brain death, if it is considered permissible, will be considered a living donation. So the concern from the community is the division. That's the conceptually, what's the division? And each scholar that thinks about, or not each scholar, but there are various camps who the definition hinges obviously on the brain death notion. The other concern that I hear mostly is the idea of risk. So as I mentioned in our project, people like to minimize risk, but there is in this public sphere, people hear about so-and-so died while trying to donate their organ, right? Or such and such transplant center had a bad outcome from a donor, right? Because you're actually assuming as a donor all the risk here. And so they want to hear, well, what is actually, to decide people, what is the actual success rate? You can go online in the United States, for example, and look at each transplant center and what their complication rates are or are not. So they actually want to know and not be dismissed by the fact that, oh, it's no more, it's no more whatever risky than a XYZ procedure, because the risk to the specific individual might be 100%, right? And so they want to get much more finer and not be dismissed around when they consider their own personal risks. And the last thing is stigma. And I mentioned this on both ends, that there is, as the Muslim community is much more communitarian, sometimes people feel, and there's books on this, that the family looks at, so-and-so person to donate for so-and-so person, that you should donate for your uncle, they've done so much for you. And so in the United States, you have the system where you go to the transplant center and you have a living donor advocate who goes through not only the medical risks, but what are the considerations you have socially. And they might sometimes say that the person is not eligible to donate to save face for that individual who feels that they're pressured or there's stigma if they were not to donate and they're being precious. But they just say it's they're not screened or they're not eligible, as opposed to, and then the family doesn't know that, okay, that this was a person who was actually feeling coerced. So I think these are concerns people have, and we try to in our workshops bring these out so people feel that at all times they have an ability to opt out. They shouldn't feel coerced, but they should be fully informed of the process and the risks that they may or may not be taking on, because it should be done in a way that they feel confident that they're making the right choice for themselves.
If I may chime in, I think the fears are natural fears. Anytime that we are asked to give of ourselves, we are a natural risk. Oh, what the impact will be on me, and I guess those fears get reduced when we have an emotional connection. Oh, it's my mom, it's my dad, it's my brother, sister. Then my giving nature kicks in. But in a general nature, no, don't touch this body of mine. It's I need to protect it. I need it from me. So I think we need to find methodologies to overcome those fears. And I think the idea of statistics and what is the risk factor, like I'm remembering going bungee jumping. What is the statistics that the rope will break? So no, well, it seems like every 1,000 one time it breaks. That's okay. I mean, people want risk factors. We deal in stats. So we need to get stats that says, okay, here are the risk factors and so on. And once people do this and get this information, then we live in a society where we are driven to make a decision based on statistics. And statistics then must be questionable, but yet can be in a sense certified. Okay, yep, no, it's coming from an authoritative body, not Pandit Sharma in the corner temple says, no, it's okay, give your organ, that's okay, everybody does it. No. So we need to get very, very formal about this. And I think once we get there, education in this methodology is our best answer to getting this to work. And I cannot overemphasize that. Education, education, education. We have a very wise society. Our younger generation are so up on information. They can tell doctors how to treat them these days. They don't need a doctor to tell them. So we need to give them strong information. Doctors are having a tough time deciding what to tell the patient because the patient comes back and says, hey, how about this, doc? And so on. Thank you for this input.
If I may add one other concern that people have in our experience at Renewal is the amount of time that it takes to go through the process. If someone gets excited about being a living donor, they're very interested in donating, and then they ask us, well, how do I do this? And we tell them this is a process that's going to take, probably 4, 5, 6 months from the day that you contact a hospital to the day you're on the operating table is easily 4 to 6 months. Sometimes people lose interest. People have busy lives in today's society, and they might be thinking, 3 months, their daughter's getting married, and 4.5 months they have vacation planned, and 6 months it's a religious holiday, and they just say, forget about it. That's too long. We live in a world of instant gratification. If someone wants to be a living donor, I believe that we should be facilitating that and making it possible that they can do it in some reasonable period of time, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 months. So I think that's a concern, is that people don't feel that they have the time to go through the extended process of being a living donor. It's a very practical concern. It's a very mundane one. And, I could say, it's not nice for someone not to be a donor because they don't want to go through the process and hang in there for 3 to 6 months. But it's their organ, it's their kidney. And if they decide they don't want to be a donor for that reason, then there's nothing that I can do about that other than, hope the situation changes at some point. But that's a very practical concern that some people have regarding living donation. It's not made easy for the donor typically.
I'm reminded, if I may, when AIDS became a reality and blood donation was being promoted, I personally would go and donate blood regularly. But when the screening process started for AIDS, it was the questionnaire was driving me nuts. I mean, the amount of personal information they got into, and I think so many people got turned off. And they said, I'm not going. These questions are just driving me crazy. I mean, I have to get into my personal life so deep. So the process of screening someone has to be in such a way, we must be sensitive to what we are asking people for and what we need to know about them before they give you what you're asking for. I don't know the answer to the question. I just know that in our community, we used to have a blood donation clinic every year, but it died after that. It never happened again. So with good intentions, we scared people away, or we deterred them because the information was too personal, too intimate to deal with when there was a willingness to help also. So as I said, I don't know the answer, but it's certainly an area that we need to consider going forward.
Transplant programs are certainly aware that there's a delicate balance between rigorous assessment of potential donors and being donor friendly in the sense of respecting that people have other things that they want to do in life. So there's actually research and innovation happening in this area right now to try and optimize that balance. I think we have a question on Slido for Pastor Bruce or Pastor Joel or Claudia about subsequent experience in your congregation since Claudia's transplant.
I am not aware of any other individuals who have found donors through our church. I mean, it's not something that we advertise or specialize in. I can understand what Brother Anhang said, we could very quickly be overwhelmed. What we found in our case, and Claudia and Joel can very easily substantiate this, existing relationships led to this success. It was the existing family and extended family relationships in the church that brought this about. So my encouragement is to anybody watching, get involved in a faith community, get involved in your neighborhood church or congregation, and start developing those relationships, because that's what led to this success. But the other thing at play, obviously, was the power of social media, and that was a huge factor in Claudia's case. So in that sense, you don't necessarily, if you have a connection, whatever your connections are, the power of social media can help get your message and your needs across. So that would be very much encouraged as well.
I can just add one follow-up item that I've experienced is that someone actually who isn't a member of our church, but is actually connected to me, a family member through marriage, approached me and asked me if I would make a video for them because they're on dialysis. They just started dialysis. So knowing that this process of digital media advocacy worked with Claudia, obviously coupled with prayer and her faith and God's goodness to her, but they approached me personally and asked me if I could assist them as well. So it has produced some residual impact as well.
If I can chime in for a moment, I think part of the discussion is that in me going through this process, it opened up a dialogue in terms of talking about what is kidney disease, transplantation. I think if had I not been comfortable enough to have that discussion with my church family, people would not even have given it a thought about transplantation. So I think for a lot of people in the community, regardless of what denomination you belong to, it's about feeling comfortable enough to actually go ahead and share your story, because you don't know how your story will touch somebody else's life.
Absolutely. Thanks, Claudia.
Thanks. And it occurs to me that maybe this concern about individual organizations becoming overwhelmed with requests is a kind of growing pain as we build out the infrastructure for social connections and for raising awareness about living donation. We have about 10 minutes left. Courtney, if you want to look through the Slido questions and figure out how many we can answer, that would be great.
For sure. Yeah, I think we have about 6 more questions. I think one of those might just be a link. So let's try to get through these. As representatives of your faith, have non-active members of your community reached out for help looking for a living donor? Is this something your House of Prayer encourages? If so, how do you share the information?
In the past, when situations occur in our community, like people will need a marrow transplant, for instance, and there is a great need, and this is something unique, it is brought to our attention, whether they attend the congregation or not, the community does make an effort to outreach. This has happened in the past. When specific conditions comes up, a once in a while situation, yes, our community has been able to get engaged and spread the word and promote and advocate for the need of that individual. And there is no issues doing this. It seems to be something that people are quite happy with. But after that situation occurred and gone, everybody goes back to sleep.
All right. Pastor Joel created a video to help Claudia find a donor. Have any other faith leaders used other methods to help find donors? Social media, community outreach, speaking to the members. We might have touched on this a little bit already, but if anyone has anything they would like to add.
I can add just one quick thing.
Sure.
Along with producing the video, we also dedicated time during a Sunday morning service for Claudia to come to the front and to share her story live. And we then supplemented that with the video, actually several different videos, at least 2 videos we made. Some were update videos. So it was a combination of Claudia speaking directly. We sent out emails, and the video obviously was a key piece.
Great, thank you. Claudia, you've been receiving quite a few questions, so let's try to get to some of these. Claudia, can you talk about the impact of faith and community post-transplant?
Well, I can definitely say that I was so blessed to have my church family supporting me throughout my journey. Whether it was through prayer or whether it was through visits, volunteers coming forward to provide rides to go into dialysis. I definitely, my family and I were so blessed to have that support. There's something about having that support system around you that makes that journey a little bit easier. And so I would definitely encourage those who are in the community, whether it be through your church or just your neighbors. If you know somebody who is going through this journey, definitely ask what you can do to help, because those little gestures mean a whole lot to those people.
Thank you. So it looks like all the remaining questions are for you, Claudia. So this one is just about, I can relate to you not knowing how sick I was until I got better. After your transplant, did you feel feelings of fear, sadness with the thoughts of going back to that place? Did your spiritual beliefs help you through this? And if so, what did you do?
Absolutely. So I can say that the only initial sense of fear I had was in the beginning prior to going into surgery. But after that, I can say that I no longer count the days, I count the quality of life that I have. So I enjoy each moment because each moment is precious. And I can say that truly my faith has helped guide me through this. Whatever the future holds, I'm enjoying every single moment that I have here on earth. And I'm enjoying the time with my family and my friends. So I can say that, yes, I'm not experiencing any fear or sadness. I'm just enjoying life to its fullest.
That's really great to hear. And then the last one, many patients are not comfortable sharing their stories or asking for help. How did you feel when Pastor Joel suggested creating a video?
So of course, there's always a sense of apprehension in sharing one's story. There's that issue of, it's private. I don't know if I want to share, but I think in going through that journey and sharing my story, in a lot of ways, it was very cathartic for me, because I had been holding on to a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear of how are people going to look at me. And the more I shared my story, the more comfortable I became in sharing that. And I realized that how much my story touched the lives of others in ways that I had never even thought of.
Thanks, Claudia.
We covered a lot of ground in the past 2.5 hours. I'd like to express my thanks to our panelists, those who submitted questions, and everyone watching at home. We really appreciate your participation in this ongoing ecumenical discussion. Just a reminder to check out our other sessions for Living Donation Week 2020. You can find the complete schedule of events at www.livingorgandonation.ca. Again, that's www.livingorgandonation.ca. And now I'm going to turn the podium back over to the Center for Living Donation.
Great. Thank you to everyone who joined us and everyone who submitted questions and our fantastic panelists today. Finally, I just want to say that we are exceptionally grateful for the generosity of our founding supporters, Estella's Pharma Company, and the Kearney and Cahill families. And a big thank you to the Toronto General and Western Hospital Foundation for their continued support. Thanks, everyone.